So today we're going to be replacing the driver's side CV shaft or axle shaft on a 2001 Honda Accord. So we're going to start by removing 4 19mm lug nuts. Now that we have the wheel off, we're going to remove this 36mm axle nut right here. I advise using an impact gun. If you don't have that, use a big breaker bar like the one I have here. Okay, now that we have the axle nut off, as you can see, it's quite rusty. So maybe, well, we're taking this shaft out anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But we're gonna go ahead and loosen this fork, the strut fork right here. There's a nut on this side. I believe it's a 17. And then the bolt on the other side. So you can use 2 sockets, or you can use a wrench and a socket, a combination, doesn't really matter. You just gotta get this fork off the lower control arm, which this is. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, now that we have the lower fork disconnected, we can go ahead and remove the 17mm nut on the tie rod. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, now that we got the nut off on the tie rod, we're gonna have to separate the tie rod from the spindle, the knuckle, the upright, whatever you want to call it. In order to do that, we're gonna have to use a ball joint separator, which I have right here. A lot of people just whack at the upper control arm and hammer it right here to try to separate it. Sometimes it'll work, but that's not the most ideal way of separating it. It's a pretty ghetto way, if you ask me, but yeah, I'm going to set it up and show you what it looks like. Okay, so this is what the ball joint separator looks like when it's in position. So once you start tightening on this screw right here, it'll move this lever upwards, pushing this lever downwards, and it'll push it in that direction, and it'll just pop out and make a loud bang. So don't be scared, go ahead and tighten it. So now that I just experienced my first ever gunshot in real life, this is what it looks like separated. And yeah, so let's keep going. Okay, so I've decided to go ahead and remove the upper ball joint. So take this cotter pin out and then remove the castle nut and then separate the upper ball joint with a ball joint separator tool. So now that I've separated the upper ball joint, you should be able to swing the whole knuckle out. And you should have enough room to take out the CV shaft here. Just give it a tap with a hammer right here. Push it out, and hopefully, like I said, you have enough room. If you need to swing the knuckle out anymore, you can remove the brake line and ABS sensor wire attachment up here to allow the knuckle to swing out even more. Okay, so now that I've got the new CV axle thrown in here, it took a lot of persuasion to pull the old one out and to push the new one in, but be persistent and try to pull and push really hard. I actually ended up taking the fork off. It's just a 14mm through bolt right here, or a pinch bolt. You can take that off and just take the fork off. It makes maneuvering the drive shaft out of there much easier. Now I've got the new shaft in, I'm gonna reattach the upper ball joint and then the tie rod, and then we should be good to go. So I've put the upper ball joint nut, the castle nut, back on. I'm not sure what the torque spec is, but you can look it up and torque it to spec. Ideally, you'd want to replace the cotter pin. I just use the old one. Not much you can do, but still pretty good. I also, in the removal process, I unbolted the ABS sensor wire from the knuckle. It's just 2 10mm bolts, and then the one brake line mount is also just a 10mm bolt. It also made removing the drive shaft much easier. So I'm gonna put those back as well. Okay, so the last thing I did was after tightening this upper ball joint castle nut and putting the cotter pin back in, I tightened this nut here, the tie rod. Again, not sure what the torque spec is. You can look it up and torque it to spec. I just tighten it snug. Now the next step is to, after of course you've put the ABS sensor wire bracket back on, as well as the brake line bracket. After you've put those back on, you can torque this guy, the axle nut, to spec. So again, sorry, I'm not sure what the torque spec is, but I believe it's somewhere around 130 or 135 or something foot-pounds. So you can torque that to spec. You can get someone inside the car to hold the brake pedal for you to stop the rotor from spinning, and that'll allow you to torque it to spec. Otherwise, you can probably just use an impact gun and tighten it. And then after that, you're gonna have to, there's a little notch here, this little notch. You're gonna have to take a punch and stake the lip of the nut into that notch as a safety measure, so it doesn't come undone. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that and show you what it looks like. Okay, so I've torqued the axle nut to 135 foot-pounds, and then I've staked the that lip right into that notch. I probably should have used a circular punch. I just used a flathead punch, but it's okay. I mean, it does the job. So now we can go ahead and throw the wheels back on. The torque spec for those is 80 foot-pounds. And that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching.